I hope you've been enjoying my vignettes. I have two more for you here. I'd like to tell you this is actually a story that I've used for my students to help show them some of the pitfalls of percentages. The students that I teach have been using standards-based grading since they were in kindergarten, and by the time they're 13, which is when I teach them, they're feeling a bit rebellious towards standards-based or 4-point rubric or whatnot, and they almost think that it would be better if they were assessed using percentages. So this past year, a couple days before we write a test or something like that, or when we do a project, I've done this once or twice, I draw this vignette up on the board and I surprise them and I say, you know what, you guys, you were right. I changed my mind. I'm going to use percentages. I'm going to assess you based off percentages. And usually the class is kind of buzzing like, oh, yes, finally, percentages. Like, my goodness, this has been so dumb. We've been using it for so long. And then I show them student one here. And student one, I don't let them know this, but I start drawing it out. And I say, okay, so here's how it's going to work. 60% test, 20% quiz, 15% homework, 5% attendance, yada, yada, yada. And I show them this student who likely struggles with test anxiety. This is a legit thing. I don't tell them this, but I demonstrate, okay, here's a student that's probably struggling from test anxiety. But it's clear that in lower pressure scenarios like quizzes and homework, the student is performing exceptionally well and they're attending class. Fantastic. Let's look at a second student here. But you'll notice here, low performing on tests because of that anxiety, and they're ending up with 66%. That's not as well as a lot of my students would like to do if we're translating between percentages and letter grades. Here we have student two, and student two can't solve a quiz to save their life. This is a slow learner, a late bloomer. Learning curve is not quite the same, but you can tell they work hard to study and show that they've learned something by the time that they write a test. So they have a much higher testing score performance, but both students receive 66%. And at this point, my students usually say, oh, wow. And I tell them that in percents, every percent counts, and every percent will sometimes count against you. But I tell them that it's actually good news. I will not be using percentages, that I'm looking for learning, and I'm going to look for the most relevant or recent artifact that goes with the learning target. So for student one, if tests were frequently failing, I would look to see if any of those quizzes that they're acing accomplish the same target. And if they do, I will use that to reflect their learning or to report their learning. If they did, I would have no problem saying that the student can do that target. They're proficient. For this second student, if I looked at the most recent assessments of each target, I would notice that the tests were well accomplished. Why would I let those old quizzes hold them back, or even their homework? The point is whether they can accomplish the target, and if certain artifacts say they can, they're proficient. Students usually take a sigh of relief when they hear this, and it helps them know that my professional judgment is seeking to be as accurate as possible, but also as gracious as possible. It allows for students to take risks, especially when trying to extend their learning. I'm so passionate about that. Students know that I'll look for the most relevant or recent artifacts, and they aren't afraid to fail anymore. They know that they can do their best on a project, test, or extension, and no matter how they do, they will learn and be rewarded for what they have learned. It's a beautiful thing. So the question remains, if this is not the way to do it, how do we report when we're looking at learning targets? First, we can't gather data based off numbers or point totals or percentages. We have to shake up our grade book. Here, I have a friend of mine. This is up here. This is Mr. Tim Cavey. He is the host of the Teachers on Fire podcast and YouTube channel. And he has a video explaining his gradeless gradebook. And I've put a link in the notes that you may be following along with today. So I'd like to point you in the direction of this YouTube channel. And in the video, you'll see how he collects the data by target. And here you'll see a spreadsheet with targets, whether or not students can accomplish those targets. We can begin to see proficiency trends, and we can start to see that trends are more powerful than blends. Averages or percentages are not the best way to do it. I have an iteration of this grade book also that I would like to show you. Here. So here you can start to see our final destination topics, the success criteria beneath it in a checklist, and below all those you have all of your exploring the goal targets that could be used on quizzes or exit tickets or whatnot. I keep track by target, and I also keep track by most recent, the most recent being near the top. I also differentiate if it was a quiz or an exit ticket or an observation, and I also keep track of who was assessing those things. You'll note that if a student did not hand one in, there's a hyphen or a dash because I don't need to hinder a student for something that they didn't do. If they showed me that they couldn't do it, well, then I would assess it as perhaps emerging or developing because they're struggling. But if they were absent, I won't say that they're struggling. I can't let that happen. I just will say that there's no evidence of learning. The other thing you'll note is I will not use the EX abbreviation in those boxes that are exploring the goal. I only use EX if a student has extended beyond our final destination learning goal. And you'll notice I also have the extension in there. This is the third appendix. If you'd like to look at this closer or even make a copy on Google Sheets, it's available to you. But what I'd like you to notice most of all is that all of the exploring the goal targets are there. They can be repeated. They can be shown as improvement. All of the cells are colored so I can see trends of proficiency. And the final destination target is at the top, showing me exactly whether they have achieved proficiency. I have the success criteria in checkboxes as well, and then also the opportunity for students to extend. It's important to recognize that not all targets are created equal. And I hope that this video has emphasized this enough because, for instance, your final destination target is pretty darn important. Students need to be able to model proportional reasoning or apply the Pythagorean theorem by the time they finish your course. And that target is probably more important than memorizing squares or square roots or explaining what a ratio is because they build on itself. So this is where I look for what's the most relevant target, especially when I'm considering reporting. Both targets should be in the grade book. They're linked, but reporting should share the most important learning, and certain targets are more important. Now, over the course of a large amount of time, like maybe 3 months, is probably not enough time. You probably need more time. You'll be able to gather trends of big targets, little targets, and all of those different proficiencies. And teachers will be able to see what significant trends emerge from their evaluations. And those evaluations will create trends that are worth reporting to stakeholders. I would encourage you to take a look at this actual document other than the screenshot that I'm using, and you'll have a better idea as to what's going on. But I think we're starting to get on the right track of seeing trends rather than blends. So if I had a report card, which I'm going to show you shortly, I will use my functional subjective judgment to report out what the most important trend is. I'll see what targets are most important. I'll see what artifacts are most relevant, and I'll see what learning is most recent. Here's a sample report for math. And I know this might be daunting, but I think the best reports don't just include a proficiency assessment, but also an anecdotal comment. Like we said before, clarity is best. So here's a sample report card that could be sent home to parents. This is much like the reports that I do for my 8th grade students. I do this once a year. So here it says Liam is growing in his numeracy skills. Grade 8 mathematics classes are focused on working together and collaborating. He can collaborate in a peer group effectively. When solving fraction operations, Liam did not find success early on. However, after continued practice and resilience, Liam demonstrated proficiency on the fractions retest. In addition, Liam demonstrated proficiency when calculating proportional models using algebra. Understanding proportions was a very positive moment for Liam in the class as it spurred his confidence when approaching mathematics. Moving forward, Liam would benefit from continuing to have a positive attitude and completing additional check your understanding questions at home when necessary. Let's take a look at a second one in a moment. But here, a student like Liam has not found immediate or consistent success, but their most relevant or recent artifacts reflect the proficient assessment. The anecdotal comment elaborates on why Liam has a complete understanding of what's being taught. Let's take a look at our second one. David is growing in his numeracy skills. Grade 8 mathematics classes are focused on working together and collaborating. He is learning to collaborate effectively with his peers in the math classroom. After numerous math support sessions, David found success when solving fraction operations. David shows ownership over his learning and was willing to reattempt assignments to improve on his learning targets. In addition, David demonstrated proficiency when calculating proportions with teacher support. Much of David's success has come from his ability to work hard and overcome challenges. Many of these strengths have also come from receiving math support from our class EA. Moving forward, David would benefit from continuing to learn with teacher support. Developing. So here you'll see a student like David struggled to comprehend fractions at first and required teacher support to solve problems. Learning targets, success criteria, and professional judgment allows us to be detailed and clear when articulating where a student is at. If we set up curriculum design, rubrics, and grade books accordingly, teachers can clearly articulate how a student is learning. While not all schools and districts use report cards, clarity is important in all areas of reporting. I'll add one tidbit about using portfolios and ongoing reporting, as I know some districts or school boards, they'll use digital portfolios. And my school uses digital portfolios. So when using ongoing reporting like a digital portfolio, I would say the same rules apply. If something is reported, it needs clarity. It needs a target. It needs a this means that and some form of feedback. It probably needs that every time because we need to know what the student was trying to do, what they needed to do to be successful, and whether or not they got there. So for instance, if I take a picture of the Space Needle proportional model and I post that to FreshGrade or Seesaw or what have you, I would ensure that either I or the student comment on the photo with the target that was expected of them. Otherwise, it's just arts and crafts. And then I could comment or reflect on what it meant to be successful on that assignment and whether they demonstrated proficiency. In fact, on all of my digital assignments, I don't know if you're a Google Classroom user, on any digital assignment that I know is going to go on a digital portfolio because it's worth submitting, or almost actually anything I do on Google Classroom, it has an I can and a this means that. And if it's on a Google slide, it's on every single slide so that people always know what the student is doing and how they can be successful. The same the same goes for almost any post that you're going to do. Same goes for a rubric. Like if a rubric goes home, maybe you don't do digital, you do paper. If a rubric goes home without either of those, you might as well be using percentages. I know it's a scathing critique, but you have to have a learning target with success criteria. You have to have an I can and this means that. Remember how we decided that 75% is somewhat meaningless on its own? The same could be argued for proficient. While we have a definition that's complete understanding, right? BC, complete understanding. That means nothing on a report rubric without clarity of context. Regardless, reporting with standards-based grading is an important step, and clarity remains to be king. At the end of the day, it's up to you to see how creative you can be when assessing or reporting, but keep the continuum in mind. One last in sum for our wonderful 4 sessions here. We can define proficiency with a 4-point scale. Less gradations is better, remember? We can use our success criteria to identify whether students are proficient. When assessing, teachers look at the most relevant or recent artifact related to the main target. Report proficiency based off of trends and use professional judgment to identify which targets or artifacts are most relevant to the learning. Find ways to collect learning data based on targets. Allow room in your gradebook for targets to be attempted more than once. Report more than just proficient or developing. Find ways to clarify what the report means in either a report card with an anecdotal comment or portfolios with targets, success criteria, and feedback. It's your turn. I've shown you how to dismantle percentages and point scores, to design curriculum with targets, define targets with criteria, and enrich understanding with Bloom's taxonomy, and evaluate targets using standards-based grading. It's up to you to share the problems of percentages and point scores, to create continuums of your own, to find new ways to use formative and summative assessment vehicles, as I often referred to projects and tests or quizzes or exit slips. You can come up with your own. Discover new rubrics for evaluating learning targets. Share standards-based gradebooks that focus on goals and not points. Finally, I have a bit of a twist on my references or my suggested reading. Here are some Twitter accounts I think you should follow. There's me, I'm Mr. Riley Dueck, but Shannon Schinkel, Nina Pack-Louie, Jen Moroz, Tim Cavey, and Tom Schimmer are all worthwhile assessment and mathematics Twitter follows. I think that if you are on Twitter, they're all must follows. Some blogs for you, some written by those Twitterers or tweeters or whatever, but Jen Moroz, Shannon Schinkel, Teachers on Fire, which is my friend Tim Cavey, and Nina Pack-Louie. And then books, 10 Mind Frames for Visible Learning. I've mentioned that before. Building Thinking Classrooms in Mathematics and Softening the Edges, assessment practices that honor K-12 teachers and learners. And then finally, some articles. The Kasberg article is a fantastic one for understanding Bloom's taxonomy, specifically using it in mathematics and on referring to mathematics tests and the skills that are being used. And then Guskey's Case Against Percentages will help continue to unpack some of the 4 problems that I or articulated in the first session. Peter Liljedahl's 4 Purposes of Assessment. He is a math education genius. So that's a short one. It's a really great read as well. And then all the way back in 2001, Romagnano was talking about the myths of objectivity in the mathematics assessment. It's quite something to come all this year, be in 2022, and look back and say, you know what, there are some scholars that really had it right back then. It's not just abandoning tradition, it's just correcting the course. I thanked people at the beginning, but I'm just so thankful again as I wrap up my final session here. Again, if you're in need of anything, feel free to look at the links for the handouts, the scripts, and appendices. Also, you saw where my Twitter is. If you'd like to get in touch, if there's something that popped out to you, I'm sure there are questions. That's the one downside of recording previously, is not being able to take live questions. But I'm sure there are questions, and I'm sure there are wonderful ideas percolating in terms of your curriculum design and assessment in your mathematics classrooms. Thank you so much for joining me once more. It has been my pleasure to be your learning guide today, and I just wish you all the best. Thank you.